Good evening, everyone. My name's Renee Hoyos, and I'll be the moderator, tonight. I'm very fortunate here to be talking with two folks from the Allies of Knoxville's Immigrant Neighbors, also known as AKIN, which I just love that acronym, AKIN. It's such a great acronym. Moira, who is the co-chair of the Allies of Knoxville's Immigrant Neighbors, and Barber, who is a member of the organization. Ladies, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
You're very, very welcome. Well, tell us all about AKIN and what its mission is and what you folks are doing.
So our mission is really to make Knoxville a more welcoming community for everybody, and we do that particularly by giving support to our immigrant and asylum-seeking neighbors. Mm-hmm. And our efforts right now are really focused on opposing the renewal of the 287G program, because that's a local program that really negatively impacts a lot of our immigrant neighbors.
So tell us a little bit about 287G.
Well, I'll answer that one if you don't mind. Numbers and letters, but let's make sense of it. The 287G is the name or the numbers of a section of the law that the U.S. Immigration and Custom Enforcement Office oversees, which everyone calls ICE, ICE, because that's easy to remember. 287G is one of the partnership, if you will, initiatives of ICE. What does 287G do? It allows members of a local, and that's the important word, local law enforcement department, such as the sheriff's deputies, to perform this federal agency, ICE's, work of immigrant enforcement. Partnership means that local law enforcement officials can enter into a contract with ICE on a voluntary basis. It's not required. In other words, local law enforcement is doing a federal agency's job. When an agency, such as the sheriff's office, signs a contract, which is also, as long as I'm giving you complicated names, is called Memorandum of Understanding, of Agreement, MOA, but that's the only time I'll mention that, so don't have to memorize it. ICE provides an initial 4-week training to the deputies who are chosen, and they provide that training in Charleston, South Carolina. The criteria to be selected for a deputy of a local agency to act for ICE is that 1, you must be a U.S. citizen. 2, you have had a current and completed background investigation completed, and you have no disciplinary actions that are pending. It isn't clear to me who pays for this training and who pays for time away from work, nor is it clear to me if our current local ICE deputies meet all of the above requirements. I just don't know. Currently, Knox County is the only county in Tennessee still involved in 287G.
So were there other counties involved in 287G in Tennessee?
In the past, and I believe Moira is going to speak to that.
Okay.
I dealt with the legal part of it to try to decipher what the numbers and letters were.
Okay, Moira?
So the most egregious example we have of a negative consequence of 287G indeed occurred in another county in Tennessee. So Davidson County in Nashville had 287G until 2015. And one of the reasons they declined to continue participation in the program was because they ended up with a lawsuit because an immigrant woman named Juana Villegas was pulled over when she was taking her child to ball practice, was pulled over, cited for not having a license. However, Ms. Villegas was also 9 months pregnant. And when she was detained, she was required then, when she went into labor, to deliver her child while shackled to her hospital bed. So, needless to say, immense health concerns for the mother, for the child. She went to court. The county was held liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages, and that just goes to show one of the many reasons that 287G is not healthy for a county, because you can end up with severe liability from civil rights violations.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
It was horrible.
Yeah. What other issues are associated? What are some of the other impacts of 287G?
So we have some of the issues that are reasons that it becomes very problematic in a community. One of the main ones is that it's expensive.
Yeah, and I'd like to step back just a little bit and to give you a history of 287G in Knox County.
Yeah, and how it's worked here. Yeah, that's true.
Since we are the only county that still has 287G in Tennessee. In 2009, the former sheriff applied for 287G status. Remember, it's voluntary, and it was initially denied after strong community opposition. He reapplied in 2017, and the application was approved, and then he signed the contract with the federal agency. This contract now allows our local deputies, those who have been to the ICE training, to act as federal agents in Knox County, and I'm paying their salary. As are you, as are you. That contract, and this is the urgency, that contract is up for renewal June 30, 2019. In other words, 2 months from now. So there's an urgency. If you hear the passion in my voice, it's because it is very urgent. AKIN is making a very concerted effort in Knox County to make folks aware of the costs and the damage to our entire community of this contract. We are urging community members to contact the current sheriff, Mr. Tom Spangler. He came into office when this existed, and so we're sure that he will understand the humanitarian crisis that it causes. We're urging him not to renew, and also our county officials who have part of the purse strings, not to renew 287G whenever it comes up. As Moira said, it is expensive. It diverts money from local taxpayers to pay for federal enforcement by a federal agency instead of our local issues, which can be an opioid crisis that we all know about. So we're not using our tax dollars, our local tax dollars, for local initiatives. Also, what happens when parents are deported? A child is a U.S. citizen. Is not a citizen of Mexico or Guatemala or Argentina. The child is a U.S. citizen. What happens to that child? Does he become homeless? Does she go into foster care? So I said it is expensive. Foster care is a very poor substitute for parenting. I know there are many wonderful foster care people, but having your own parents it's not even in the same ballgame.
Well,
so
and we're speaking about these are not necessarily criminal proceedings.
No, exactly.
Right. And
so what we're finding is that one of the reasons that both the former and the current sheriff have given for continued participation in 287G is they say that it makes our community safer. But what we're finding through research is that that's not the case. What a local researcher at the University of Tennessee has done, she's gone through the records for like the past 15 months when people have been detained under 287G or an ancillary bed contract that we have with the U.S. Marshal Service. And what the research found is that the vast majority of people who are detained under these programs are not violent offenders. So that when we have our sheriff saying it's making our community safer, and the vast majority of people who are being detained are not violent offenders, that goes against his argument. Not only that, what the analysis found is that almost a quarter of the people who are detained for driver's license violations. So as Ann was saying, we have people who are being detained for potentially driving without a license or a lane change violation or a taillight that's put out, so that if they're put into deportation proceedings, they're leaving a family without a provider, no parents for child care. That family support is being wrenched for driving without a license. That inhumane consequence seems to be unequal to the supposed violation, and it's also especially challenging because our immigrant neighbors who might want to get a driver's license are not even allowed to do so in the state of Tennessee. So the argument that it makes our county safer is just not true. What it ends up doing is just wrenching families apart for no good reason.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd like to add, the driver's license issue is a huge issue. The current issue, though, right now is opposing the renewal of 287G. But many of these people did have a legal driver's license and are no longer able to renew it. So it's not that they just kind of sailed in and said, I'm going to skip that. They no longer
have the opportunity.
Have the opportunity to get a driver's license.
Yeah. And one of the other big things that we find is that having this kind of statute on the books makes it easier to do racial profiling. So, law enforcement just sort of segues into that when you've got this sort of thing on the books. And the other thing is that it makes the community less safe overall, because we have our immigrant neighbors then less likely to want to engage with law enforcement. So if crime is being committed in a certain part of our community, where maybe there are some immigrant neighbors who have witnessed a crime or been victim to a crime, they're much less likely to come forward and give information that could actually help the entire community to stay safe. So undermining the law enforcement integrity between one part of the community and our deputies affects us all and makes the entire area and the county less safe for everybody.
And I can respond to that as a teacher. Hear something, say something. See something, say something.
Right.
If I am open, many kids come and say, point out things. How do we deal with that? In a very low-key manner. Something is dealt with before it becomes front-page news.
Right.
If a citizen or someone who doesn't have the documented papers sees something that makes them uncomfortable and they feel comfortable talking to you about it, you can intervene in a safe way. I have to tell you, I do not like reading about myself on the front page of the newspaper. I want to teach my kids, go home and say, tomorrow we're going to learn this, not read about some awful event on the front page of the newspaper. And I would say I'm not rare in that.
So we want all our residents of Knox County to feel like they can positively come forward and talk to law enforcement without fear of any kind of repercussions for that.
Now, the 287G is held by the sheriffs.
Right.
Is Knoxville City Police involved at all?
So that's a good question.
Yes.
So the way our program runs is that it's a jail-based program. There's a slightly different version, but our version here in Knox County is a jail-based program. And because the city of Knoxville does not have its own jail and funnels anyone that it arrests and who needs to be detained to the Knox County jail, the Knoxville Police Department is in fact complicit in 287G because so many of the people who end up in the Knox County Detention Facility have in fact been arrested by KPD officers. So as much as the mayor says that she wants a welcoming community and city, and we don't doubt that, what we're not sure the Knoxville Police Department has fully understood is how the process of 287G works, and that their officers are in fact funneling people into ICE's deportation machine just because they have no choice but to participate with the Knox County Detention Facility, which is run by the Knox County Sheriff's Department.
So are you saying that they are actually doing some of the profiling? And
No. Anyone they arrest who ends up in the Knox County Jail can be then automatically run
then
through.
they're processed then.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So because the city does not have its own jail, the minute it
I
puts
see.
somebody into the county jail, that's on the county's watch, and then they're sort of the
And
county's
they do it.
responsibility, and they can be put through the ICE machine because that's where the program runs.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
And as for the racial profiling, I have to admit that I have driven with a taillight out. It's not my choice. And I'm glad whenever a kind policeman says, do you realize you have a taillight out? And I have said, thank you, I'm going home and I will deal with it. I have not been arrested.
Right.
Yes, I am an old white woman. And that has granted me privilege, if you will. I know that several people have been picked up who are not old white women because they have a taillight out. I don't think it's intentional, but the result is still the same. And that's what we're looking at, is not pointing fingers of you are bad, but what are the results of this action? And that's part of what AKIN is education.
So what have you been hearing from the community about how 287G has been impacting lives?
One of the things, I'll talk about one thing, and then Ann has some personal stories that she's aware of. A couple of things we hear come from people who are concerned specifically with children's needs. So we have parents who need to transport their children to school, or what we're hearing is that sometimes parents do not want to transport their children to the health department to get vaccinations or for medical appointments because they're afraid they might be detained on the way to the health department. So we're finding that it's impacting the health of some Knox County children who do not have transportation for their medical needs because of fear of being pulled over. Likewise, we have parents who are very concerned. They send their children to school, but they do so with fear. They're not sure what would happen to their children if they were detained for some reason while their children are in school. We've not had a workplace raid in Knox County recently, but there was one major one up in Bean Station, and there has been one in Blount County. Actually, there has been one recently in Knox County. But so what we find is that at least up in Bean Station, when they had that massive raid, people didn't send their children to school the next day. Right. So when you have parents, and they do not have 287G in that county, but the 287G program increases that level of fear and makes parents very concerned about what happens to their children if something happens to them when their children are not in their company. And so we find parents who are very worried about who is going to bring up their children or how their children's future would be financed if they are detained and then put into deportation or removal proceedings. So there's just a constant level of fear in the community that 287G sort of engenders.
So do you think that having 287G in our county has precipitated some of these raids, since ICE knows that they can get people in detention faster?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think
Okay.
so.
So I think they're separate things.
Okay.
I think those raids were done by ICE, you know, and what we're talking about with 287G is a locally based program run by trained sheriff's deputies.
Which is what our issue is.
Right.
If ICE is doing something, that's
Right.
ICE, and it's a
Exactly.
federal agency.
That's right.
And we are saying locally,
That's right.
we do not want to enforce a federal agency's mandate.
Right.
We want our local money to enforce local laws. So, shall I tell some of the local
please.
consequences?
Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to go global, if you will. And I'll read some numbers. Worldwide, immigrants make up 3% of the global population. Of that 3%, they produce 9% of the GDP, or the gross domestic product. That's a threefold amount. Sometimes the money goes home to their original country. Sometimes it's used as entrepreneurs and innovators. And now I'm going to bring it locally. We have those people in our very own county and our very own city. One of those immigrants showed up at the recent fire over in Oakwood Lincoln Park and brought food for the firefighters. That local immigrant, if you will, gave a really good picture of Knoxville to the nation. He was interviewed by, was it ABC? Good Morning America, whoever ABC is. And Knoxville was identified as one of the friendliest places to visit.
Right, yeah.
That's not bad, you know. I'm kind of proud of that, and I kind of thump the chest and say bravo to us. So of the 3% global immigration, and we follow that pretty much, 9% contribution. There's another factor, and you're looking at her. I am an old white woman. There are many like us. We are called the baby boomers, and many of us are reaching retirement or past retirement. The immigrants bring in young children who become good, strong workers and educated workers. It behooves us to educate. And you know what? They turn around. So when I am drooling out of both sides of my mouth, there is somebody there holding my hand saying, it's okay, you know. So worldwide, the nations like us, the rich nations, if you will, are losing population to old age, and we are no longer producing something for the community. The young immigrants that are coming in are, one, taking low-paid jobs, which again improves our economy. Every time you go to eat out, there's probably an immigrant who is preparing parts of the food, including the chickens up at Bean Station. Lawn care, picking sweet potatoes in South Carolina or in Georgia and such. So instead of saying immigrants drag us down, they're actually, and I'm being very selfish here, they're actually helping people like me. Who, like I said, I'm an old white woman. You cannot call me that, and you can't either, but I can. So I was going to answer the question about just, I've gone from global, if you will, to local. I have personal knowledge of the difficulties of providing the driver's licenses to U.S. citizen children. These kids are in high school. They're wanting to begin their work career. They're learning good working habits. Do I show up on time? Do I dress in a certain way? And they learn that while they're in high school, supporting themselves. Maybe it's a cell phone they want, but they're still motivated, okay? How do they get there? How do they get there? if a parent cannot provide a driver's license to get that child and to drive with that child while he's trying to learn to drive, how does that child get a driver's permit? So that leaves us with the question, do we want that child to drive without a driver's license, without driver's questions, without driver's training? I can answer that, and I'm sure that you can too. Another is, there's some little kids that are collecting aluminum cans. I mean, talk about enterprise. Who's going to drive them to the recycle place and provide the ID so that they can collect on their aluminum cans and clean up the neighborhood? I mentioned foster care. That is majorly expensive. And you mentioned the health care system. So that is a huge, local, very concrete example. Two, one is the positive impact of immigrants in terms of renovation. Jeff Bezos is an immigrant, and he's done pretty well, if you ask me.
So we have a lot of examples in Knox County of our immigrant neighbors coming and opening businesses, and then they contribute to the tax base and they build up the city for everybody. And just the culture that our immigrant neighbors bring really adds to the vibrancy. And I don't think you can overlook the economic impact of cultural vibrancy. It brings people to Knoxville from surrounding communities. So we feel that our immigrant neighbors, we want to encourage them to stay in Knoxville and not decide that because of 287G, maybe they'll go live in another part of Tennessee, because our community is richer for having them here.
Yes.
And I'm a foodie, so, you know, bring in the food, right?
Yes, immigrant labor is all throughout the food chain, for sure, yeah. Now, you know, I've heard from folks that there's a vast number of people, I think, that don't agree that immigrants are contributing to the vibrancy of this community. In fact, when I was on the campaign trail, I heard a lot of pushback about immigrants and how they take up all this money and they take up social services and they're in our schools displacing children. What are your responses to those kinds of objections?
So first of all, there's a distinction that everybody should be making between refugees and immigrants. Okay, so refugees are here with legal status, and they're usually vetted in their home country before we get here. So that's sort of a separate issue than the group. And in Knoxville, we have an organization, Bridge Refugee Services, that works wonderfully with the refugee community here in Knoxville. AKIN tends to work with our immigrant neighbors who may not have the advantage of having been vetted in their home country and being here with that sort of status. And what we're finding is that our immigrants in our school system are just like all of our other children. They work as hard, they do their homework, they come from families that bring good values to the school system and to the community, and they are just like all the other kinds of students in Knoxville that we want to be raising up. One of the challenges that some of our students do have is that we do not allow our immigrant students to participate in Tennessee Promise or get some of those tuition opportunities that you have to have certain requirements for. So we do a good job of letting them enrich our classrooms in K-12, but not so much after that. So that's something we would definitely like to see changed. But what we would answer to all those sorts of questions is that, first of all, the federal government is very clear on what kind of services can be accessed by who, you know, and so most federal programs have very clear guidelines about who can access them. So the government has really thought this through, and if someone is accessing a program, it's because the government has decided that a certain group of people with a certain kind of identification, you know, can access that program. So it's I don't know that we've heard a lot about people accessing government funds sort of illegally or trying to scam any system.
Right. Well, that's what the rumor is, that they're you know,
I don't
taking,
know that we've had
they're
proof
on
of this.
SNAP and they're in public housing, and I kept telling these people they are not.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you're probably talking to somebody who's here as a refugee. So it's important to make those distinctions.
It is a very important distinction.
People.
Yeah.
And they pay taxes.
And they do pay taxes, and they won't get them back.
That's right. Get the taxes back.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, because they're paying for me, my Social Security.
Yes,
Okay?
exactly.
But they're not getting.
But they won't get it. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So we've got we've got a deadline coming up. It's June 30th. So what would you like? What's the ask for the public watching the show this evening? What would you like them to do?
So we really want to make sure that they get a hold of their public officials, as Ann was saying. The key public official here is Sheriff Spangler. And we have a phone number if people want to call his office and sort of register personally that you think that 287G is a negative program for our county and that you do not think it should be renewed, that phone number is 865-971-3902. So we would encourage people to call Sheriff Spangler's office and register their opposition to renewal of 287G. Likewise, we would encourage people to call your county commissioner, because the sheriff's department's budget comes through the county, and the county commission signs off on the budget. So whatever type of budget the sheriff submits to the county commission, we would be asking people to make sure that their commissioners understand what portion of that budget is supporting 287G, how is 287G being supported locally, what kind of resources is it diverting, just sort of what kind of information is Sheriff Spangler providing on that as part of his budget request.
So how much is he providing? How much does this cost?
We don't really know, because he's not really provided very much information. And when you ask county commission about that, it's our understanding that the sheriff's department budget comes to them sort of in a lump sum, as a block, as a package.
Okay.
And it's not really broken down into discrete parts where you could really see what's 287G or what parts of the budget are related to 287G. And we would encourage our elected officials, as a matter of accountability to their constituents, to look into that a little bit and find out where sort of this money goes.
Right, because he's been asking for a lot more money.
Exactly.
Right.
And so if we already don't know how that money's being parsed, then how can he ask for a big chunk of money?
Right.
That's a good point that I think the mayor should be concerned about.
And then we're encouraging people to write letters to the editor. AKIN has a website, and we would encourage you to both on print and digital media. We would encourage people to get information about 287G and spread reasons for opposition through your networks.
And do you provide talking points?
We
so
do
that folks
on our
can-
database, and you can send us an email and we'll send you all that stuff.
Okay.
And
That's good
the
to know.
two major talking points are it's expensive and it's inhumane.
Yes, and inappropriate.
Inappropriate.
For the use of funds to go to that kind of thing.
Does not forward our community's objectives.
That's right.
And our objectives are to be a kind, welcoming community.
That's right. Great. Well, do you have anything final that you'd like to add to this
Yes.
discussion? Yeah.
Seeking asylum is not illegal.
Oh, yes. To
is
go on it's
not.
not related to 287G, but it is a very good point. Yeah.
Right. Well,
Some of these neighbors who are here are asylum seekers.
asylum seekers.
So it relates to it in that some of the people who are in our community are here seeking asylum and get caught up in the 287G program.
And they're not here seeking a better life. They're here seeking life itself. They've had
That's a
family
great way to
members
put it. Yeah.
murdered and so forth.
would like
Life
to welcome them.
itself.
Right. Okay. We do want to be very welcoming. Well, it's been great having you
Thank you
both
very much.
on.
Thank you.
I want to give another shout out to AKIN. It's Allies for Knoxville's Immigrant Neighbors, and it's a wonderful organization. What's your website?
We are AKIN.
weareakin.org?
.com.
.com. Okay.
You can find it that way.
www.weareakin.com. So some very good things to share with us today. So remember, folks, June 30th is the deadline for this decision to be made about whether the county stays with 287G or if it gets rid of the program. And we'd like you all to support that with letters to the editor. Calling Sheriff Spangler. Can you repeat that number again?
865-971-3902.
Okay, great. So that's those are some ways you can do it. Letters to the editor are always good, and certainly posting things from your website. They can share things on Facebook. They've got great posts on Facebook. I'd really recommend you check out their Facebook page. You got a Twitter account?
We do have a Twitter account.
Excellent. You're going to get snarky on Twitter.
Yep.
So be sure to sign up, like all their pages, like all their social media, and start sharing this with your community, because these are really important issues that we need to get a handle on. And again, thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much.